Good afternoon, Facebook. Thank you for joining me on this rainy afternoon. Speaking of rain, I will just update you and let you know that we are watching the flood levels every day. So far, the projections are pretty good, even though if you're like me, you feel like it's been raining a lot. So at least right now, no worries about the floods. Hopefully that won't also be in 2020, along with the pandemic and the cicadas. So let me begin by talking about something that's a little off topic. Normally we talk just about the virus and COVID here, but I want to talk for a minute about the violence that occurred in our city over this past weekend. 19 people were shot, Saturday, Sunday time frame. And that is just outrageous, horrendous. Several of them were under 18 years old. And our police department, of course, is trying to solve those murders, those shootings, several murders and those shootings. 19 people were shot, 4 people died. And so anyone who does have any information about any of those, it would be very much appreciated if you would call Crime Stoppers or get in touch with the police department and give them any information that you have, because we know that the violence in our city is related to too many guns. It's related to personal disputes most of the time. Disputes about drugs, not always, but often. And when you have this level of violence, or perhaps any level of violence, but when you have this level of violence, it also often leads to retaliation. So it is important to the, as much as possible, that we're able to make arrests in these cases, because we want to avoid additional retaliation and additional violence in our city. Now, along those lines, I want to give you a quick update on Cure Violence. At a future one of these, I'm going to have Dr. Eccles here to talk about this, but he's tied up in another meeting today. And so I want to just give you a bit of an update on Cure Violence. You know that last fall, we said that we were going to embark on the Cure Violence program, which is a program where they hire interrupters to go into neighborhoods, fairly small geographies, roughly 10 blocks by 10 blocks, that sort of a size, and try to work with the folks who are there who maybe have been victims or who have been perpetrators, and try to interrupt that violence cycle. So there are 3 neighborhoods that we've targeted: Wells-Goodfellow, Walnut Park, and Dutchtown. And the first neighborhood that we've done the hiring for is in the Wells-Goodfellow neighborhood. Employment Connections, some of you are familiar with them. They are actually going to be implementing the Cure Violence program, along with consultation from Cure Violence out of Chicago. Marcus, the lead there, was in town here last week, I believe it was, right before the holiday. And Employment Connection has hired all the folks that will work on this Cure Violence team in Wells-Goodfellow. And they expect them to be on the ground, meaning on the streets in the neighborhoods, next week or the week after that. They're all going through training and that sort of thing now. The other thing is, of course, so that's the first real kickoff, if you will, of Cure Violence. And then the other 2 sites, which will follow a little further behind, Walnut Park and Dutchtown, there we have done requests for proposals for someone to operate those 2 sites. Those proposals are being reviewed now by the steering committee, and within a few weeks we will know what entities awarded the contract to implement Cure Violence in those 2 neighborhoods. So Cure Violence, and I have said this before, it's not the cure-all. It takes a lot of different things working to stem the tide of this violence. And we have, over the last 3 years, the violence has gone down a little and up a little, and this year it's right about steady with last year. That's not a good situation at all, but we know that there's very easy access to guns in the state of Missouri. Anyone can carry a gun anytime, anywhere, whether you are an adult or whether you are a child. The only folks who can't carry guns or legally carry guns are convicted felons. So that's certainly an issue. Another issue is lack of police officers. We are 142 police officers short of our authorized strength. That number has been like that more or less for the last 4 to 5 years. We actually have a class graduating, a recruit class graduating tomorrow night, 29 young people who will become police officers tomorrow night at the graduation. But that is 29 new folks, but we'll have more retirements and that sort of thing. So that's not, it's great, but it's not enough to make up the difference for being 140 officers short. We know that there are a number of reasons why we're short. One of them is better pay in other jurisdictions. One of them is a requirement to live inside the city. We call it residency requirement. And it's the recruiting, not being able to recruit out of St. Louis County, that is one of the things that we think is the most detrimental to being able to increase the number of police officers. So there are a lot of things at work here, but I think it's fair to say that, you know, this violence, which in some ways has taken a little bit of a backseat headline-wise while we're in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, is still something that's very top of mind here in my office, and I know in many offices. And so I just wanted to update you on that. I wanted to recognize the situation. I wanted to update you on Cure Violence and ask for your help in terms of, if you know anything, to please work with the police so that those individuals who perpetrate that violence can be brought to justice. So thank you for that. I thought it was important to cover that. Now we'll go back to talking about COVID. I hope you didn't mind that slight variation today. So COVID, the virus is, of course, still here. And as I've said many times, and I hope that you'll be with me on this, we all have to learn how to coexist with COVID. Because at least until there's a vaccine, no one knows when that will be, we have to figure out how to coexist with it. And so we have had good numbers, and I say good numbers, you know, for about the last month, frankly. The numbers have been getting better, maybe even a little longer than a month now. I'll give you the numbers for today. These just came out, I don't know, in the last hour. Today there are 395 people in the hospital, 91 in ICU, and 63 on ventilators. We continue to the number of new people admitted to the hospital. Yesterday was 18, the day before was 12. And so you can see this online, and I know you probably can't really see this very well, but that blue line, you will see the decrease in hospitalizations over the last, this chart starts on March 31st. So April, May, not quite 2 months of data here. And so hospitalizations are down significantly. There is more testing being done now, and there's been some news recently, I guess it was over the weekend, about how the state was reporting testing. And someone had a question about whether or not we were making information based on the wrong data. And the answer to that is no, because we're relying very heavily on the hospitalization information. Number of cases, even though we have more testing, is going down, but more importantly, the number of people in the hospital is going down, number of people in ICU is going down, the number of people on ventilators is going down. And so we think that been making the right decisions up to this point. I would be remiss if I didn't talk for a minute about what you've seen all over the news. I don't think you could have missed this. And that was the pictures from the bars, the pool bars at the Lake of the Ozarks, where there was a large group of people not socially distancing, nobody wearing masks. This was over the weekend, and Memorial Day weekend, of course. And so that has made a lot of headlines, unfortunately, around the world. And, you know, my thought about that is just that how risky that behavior is. And the folks that were there, I'm sure were there trying to have a good time, maybe not thinking about social distancing and masks. But more importantly, when the weekend was over, so yesterday or Monday or Tuesday, those folks went back to their homes, some in the city of St. Louis, some in St. Louis County, some in Kansas City, frankly, across the Midwest. We know that the Lake of the Ozarks is a place that lots of people like to go all over the Midwest. And so those folks have gone home to their communities. And, you know, the risk is that if someone there was positive, or maybe more than someone there, is that then you take that back to your communities. And, you know, of course, don't want them to get sick, and we don't want them to bring it home to their families, their co-workers, their friends, their grandma. And so that risky behavior is just something that hopefully we won't continue to see. We've got to rely on people to make good decisions, and we've got to rely on businesses as well to control the amount of people that are in their businesses. Because while we try to coexist with COVID, that means the pathway to both having businesses open and to staying healthy, that pathway is right down the center of social distancing, mask wearing, hand washing. That is our path to being able to keep businesses open. And when you keep businesses open, it's about the people who work there as much as it is the business. Because when those businesses are not open, you have a lot more people who don't have jobs. People need their jobs. They need to go to work. We need to do it in such a way that we can coexist with COVID. So those are just a few comments that I wanted to make before we get started. And Kyle is here with me today, and so he's going to be asking me some of your questions. I'm assuming we have some questions, Kyle?
Yes, Mayor, we do.
We do? We already have questions?
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
good.
So our first question comes from Bonnie. You mentioned kind of in your introduction about residency requirements. Can you provide an update on that legislation that was going on in the Missouri legislature this spring?
So Bonnie, I worked, and many people worked very hard to pass legislation at the state level that would say that police officers, primarily police officers and firefighters, don't have to be recruited just from the city of St. Louis, that they can be recruited from outside the city of St. Louis as well. It was passed through the Missouri House. It did not pass in the Senate. You know, the state legislature, they were out for 6 weeks while they were on a COVID-related hiatus. And it was disappointing, frankly, because I think that being able to recruit from a larger geographic area, I mean, we are the only place where you can only recruit from and live in this municipality. Even Kansas City, which has a residency requirement, but Kansas City has almost 400 square miles, and they're in 4 different counties, and they have 14 school districts. So it's a totally different situation. St. Louis City people work for St. Louis, people who live in St. Louis City regularly work for St. Louis County. Police officers and other positions alike, but people who live in St. Louis County cannot work for the city of St. Louis. It puts us at a real competitive disadvantage for recruiting, hiring, retaining employees, police officers, firefighters. So that's the situation. I should mention that there is an alderman now who last week introduced a bill to put residency on the ballot in the city of St. Louis. I don't know where that bill will go. I don't know whether it'll be passed or not. Meaning, when I say put residency on the ballot, I mean lift the residency requirement. So.
Mayor David has a question. So you mentioned Lake of the Ozarks over the weekend. What about large social gatherings that might be happening in the city of St. Louis? Are we monitoring those for similar sorts of activities, and were there any over the weekend you're aware of?
Well, there wasn't anything to the level of what we saw on the TV, at least from the Lake of the Ozarks. There were some smaller gatherings that were noticed, and in that case, what we do is we go and talk to that bar, restaurant operator. If it's occurring in a park, then police generally deal with that. But frankly, over this past weekend, it's pretty good in St. Louis. The people of St. Louis did a pretty good job of socially distancing, going out a little, but still socially distancing and wearing masks. So of course, there are always exceptions, and when there are, we need to deal with those. But people of St. Louis did a good job this past weekend.
Mayor Dorothy has a question. She wants to know when City Hall is going to open up. She says that she can't renew her driver's license, plates, or anything in the city.
Right. Hi, Dorothy. So City Hall is going to open to visitors on Monday, June 1st. You will, when you come to City Hall, if you need to come to City Hall, and let me back up and say, probably you can do all of that online, Dorothy. I mean, you can renew your plates, you can renew your driver's license, you can get a personal property tax receipt if you need that. So you can probably sit down at your computer today and do that. But if you can't and you actually need to come into the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles office that's on the first floor of City Hall, then when you come in on the Market Street side, you will be asked for your name and your phone number. Well, first you'll be asked, who you're going to see. You'll say, I'm going to renew my driver's license or my plates. And then what's your name, what's your telephone number. If it's already busy in the DMV office, you're going to be asked to wait in your car, and they will call you when it's within a couple of people of you getting to the front of the line. And we're doing that so that we just don't have a bunch of people bunched up in City Hall, waiting in that hallway, if you've been there before, outside the DMV office, because has to be social distancing. You also have to wear a mask when you come into City Hall. So bring your mask with you.
Mayor, a bit of a follow-up question on that. You mentioned Monday City Hall will start to reopen a bit. Does that also apply to city courts?
It does not apply to city courts, because city courts really run from the Missouri Supreme Court down to the Circuit Court to the Municipal Court. So no, city courts are not opening on Monday. Now, maybe you want to come in and pay a fine or do something like that, you'll be able to do that. But there will not be any court beginning Monday. Just like the circuit courts, for those of you that have been called to jury duty, and I've heard from a few people, jury duty's not really starting until towards the end of June. And so they're still working out how they're going to do that. So.
Mayor Gabriel sent in a question prior to this and wants to know, he doesn't own a mask and he's being denied entry to many places where he needs to buy essential items. He wants to basically know, why does he have to wear a mask?
Well, we strongly recommend that you wear a mask, because a mask keeps you safe and it keeps other people safe from you. This is a mask that I wear regularly. I've got a collection of them here. And many businesses, most businesses I would say, are requiring you to wear a mask. If you don't have a mask, it's very easy I bet you have a bandana, I bet you've got an old t-shirt, you've got something that you could make a mask out of, or you could buy a mask. Or if you're coming to City Hall and you don't have a mask, we'll give you one when you come in, because we think it's an important thing to do.
Mayor, Brett has a question about restaurants. He wants to know what the current limits on seating capacities are, and when you see those restrictions getting loosened at all.
So, Brett, in the city of St. Louis, in restaurants, the restriction is that they have to place the tables at least 6 feet apart, so that the folks sitting at the table are 6 feet apart. That's the restriction. It's in restaurants, it is not a restriction of 10%, 25%, 50%. Restaurants are, depending on how their space is organized and how they can place their tables. in addition to that, most of you know, if you're a regular watcher of this, that we are trying to help restaurants gain access to additional outside seating. Many people believe that you're better off to be seated outside than inside an enclosed room. So we are helping various restaurants, business districts, figure out how to use additional parts of the sidewalk while still keeping a pathway, how to maybe use part of the street, or even sometimes adjacent parking lots so that they can expand their seating, but there's not a percentage requirement. And quite honestly, I know you want to know, well, when are we not going to have to socially distance? I think that's going to be a while, quite honestly. Social distancing and masks are our pathway to be able to keep businesses open, and restaurants and public businesses, retail, large venues, etc. So I think that's going to be a while.
Mayor, we have a question from one of our reporter friends, Darian from Fox 2.
Hi, Darian.
He asks, he wants to know your reaction to comments made by Public Safety Director Judge Jimmy Edwards on repeat offenders going back to jail after they were released as a precaution against coronavirus.
Mm-hmm. Well, as some of you know, we're switching subjects back here, I see, to public safety. So as some of you know, our jail population, we operate 2 jails, and our jail population is down to about 760 today. I get a report every morning of how many people are being detained at either MSI or at CJC. And so I think 240 people were released from one of our correctional facilities at the beginning of this COVID. And that release was not done by the city. That was done by the attorneys, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, and the judges. And so those folks were released. Some of them, I believe Judge Edwards said a little over 50, have actually been rearrested on new charges. So for some of them, that release didn't work out, and they're back being detained again.
Mayor, another question from Facebook. Devin wants to know, what is the current status on schools reopening this fall?
So the schools are trying to figure that out right now. SLPS, St. Louis Public Schools, has not made an announcement about that. They're just finishing up this school year, and they haven't made an announcement about that. But as you may have seen, colleges, universities are beginning to make those announcements. St. Louis University, yesterday I think it was, announced that they would be opening early. I think it's August the 17th, if I'm remembering the date correctly, somewhere around there. And then they'll be ending the semester sometime around Thanksgiving. And in an effort to be able to have in-person classes, I know they will socially distance, but then also not to have their students, say, go back and forth maybe for a fall break and those sorts of things. So schools are all trying to figure that out. Some of them are better prepared than others to do this online learning. And of course, that's a real challenge for parents. So we'll have to watch the numbers for this summer, what happens. Hopefully we won't see a second spike, and we'll be able to continue on this path of reopening, and hopefully schools will be able to reopen.
Mayor, Jane has a question. Do you have any information on perhaps the Muni reopening? She wants to know how you think social distance might be observed there.
So right now, the Muni has announced that their first 2 shows have been canceled. And they are still discussing whether or not they'll be able to do any of their season. Here's the difficulty. The Muni holds about 12,000 people. And if you socially distance those folks, you would have to seat every other row, so that at least every other row, and you'd have to seat people like 3 seats apart, 2 or 3 seats apart, so that you could have at least 6 feet between people. Now, if you were a family, you live in the same household, of course you could sit together, but then the next group or individual would have to be 6 feet away from you, and you wouldn't be able to have anybody behind you. So I spoke with Denny Reagan last week about this, and they're really trying to figure out will they be able to accommodate that sort of social distancing and still have a season or not? And as far as I know, unless they've announced something today, and I don't believe they have, they're still trying to figure that out. You know, the other concern is a concern about the talent, the actors, actresses, and you know, how to keep them safe as well. So that's all still up in the air.
Mayor, another question kind of related to venues. Do you foresee MLB stadiums, hockey stadiums, anything of that nature opening for this season's sports?
Question is, do I think the Cardinals will play this summer? I think that's the boiled down question. I don't know the answer to that. I know Major League Baseball is trying to work that out with the players and trying to figure out whether or not they would play just for a TV audience versus having people go to the stadium. It's just something that we don't know at this point. You know, this COVID thing has really only, our first case in St. Louis was Our first case in St. Louis was March the 16th. That was in the city. I think it was March 7th in the county, somewhere around there. And so we've really only been dealing with this for 9 or 10 weeks, and we've all learned a lot over that 9 or 10 weeks. But it's hard to say what the next 2, 3, 4 months is going to look like. So we're evolving it.
Mayor, KD wants to know, are the city parks opening soon?
City parks have always been open. City parks never closed. So enjoy. If you've been avoiding city parks, don't. They have been open. You need to practice social distancing. You ought to wear a mask. Playgrounds are not open in the city parks. And contact sport courts. So basketball, pickleball, soccer, those are not open. But our parks we have 109 parks in the city of St. Louis. 6 of them are major parks, and our parks never closed for a day. So.
Mayor, we've received a couple of questions about gyms, or whether they be, kind of your large gym or something like a yoga studio, maybe personal training. Can you give any update on what the city's guidance is going to be looking like for that?
Yes, we issued those guidelines last week. So go online. They are included in Health Order number 9. And what it says is that gyms, yoga studios, Pilates, dance studios, that group of businesses can open on June 15th, provided they follow the guidelines, which have a lot to do with social distancing, cleaning, sanitizing, that sort of thing. So provided they follow the guidelines and provided we don't have another spike by June 15th. All of these dates that we put out there are all, we're all hoping that we don't have another spike and have to change those. But June 15th is the date that gyms can open. Check out the website for the guidelines. They're quite detailed, and I think you'll find them helpful.
Mayor, a question from St. Louis Public Radio. Corinne would like to know, one, what challenges has the city encountered so far with businesses reopening? And 2, have crowded restaurants or bars been an issue so far?
Hi, Corinne. How are you? So, it was just a week and 2 days ago, Monday the 18th, that we allowed restaurants, retail, offices to reopen. We lifted the stay-at-home order, and we allowed those businesses to reopen, provided they did social distancing, and provided all the employees wore masks. So to date, I have not seen a lot of big issues with the businesses in St. Louis. I will say that I think one of the issues is that the public has been reticent to go back out to businesses as well. So, businesses can open with restrictions, but the public has to be ready to go also. So there's been a bit of a balancing act there. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Everybody has to get used to these new requirements, and going slow on this is not a bad idea at all, because none of us want to see an increase in cases or an increase in people in the hospital. So far, so good.
Mayor, just time for a couple more questions here. Patty wants to know, When will wedding reception venues be allowed to open, and with what capacity do you see those opening?
So wedding venues, reception venues, normally fall into a category called large venues. Again, their regulations, their guidance rather, is out on our website. It's part of order number 9. And those large venues are allowed to open on June 8th. So that's about, 10, 12 days away, 12 days maybe. And provided they follow the large venue guidelines, and large venues have to submit their operating plan to the health department. The health department will review it, work back and forth with the venue on the guidelines. Once that's approved, then the venue can open, provided after June 8th or after. You'll see, for example, the zoo, I think, is opening on the 16th. The Botanical Gardens is opening on the 16th. I believe the Science Center is opening on the 20th. So the large venues, those are venues that have gotten their plans approved. They're all opening sometime in the middle of June, but banquet halls, and I'm speaking here about the city of St. Louis, not about St. Louis County, but banquet halls, those kinds of wedding reception rooms are able to open on June 8th, provided they have an approved plan and comply with the guidelines. I think you asked about capacity also.
Mm-hmm.
I should mention that they're able to open at 25% capacity. So if you have a room that holds, 500, you could have 125 people in that room. So it does take more space. There's guidelines about the seating arrangement. There's, a lot of guidelines around it. Check out the website. It's right on the homepage of the city website. Click on it. You'll go right to order number 9. Click on the large venue guidelines, and you'll be able to read through those.
Mayor, 2 more questions. Robbie wants to know if you can provide an update on the CARES Act funding, or the federal funding that was coming to the city of St. Louis.
Mm-hmm. So about $35 million in CARES Act funding has come to the city of St. Louis. It should be $53 or $54 million. That's another topic that we are taking up with the state. And so we are working now. We will have a board bill over at the Board of Aldermen, we think this week. Today's Wednesday, right?
Mm-hmm.
We still think it's going to happen this week, which outlines how we plan to spend some of that money. Now, you can imagine some of the things are pretty obvious. We've spent a lot of money on PPE, masks, gowns, shoe covers, hand sanitizer, disinfectant. We've spent a lot of money on facilities, extra cleaning in all the city buildings, a fogging system that is a sanitizer system in all the city buildings. We've spent a lot of money on providing additional facilities and operation for homeless services. So when I say spent, we have spent and are spending, because there's no end date to this here. So all of that. We also have plans to hopefully be able to help with rental assistance, to be able to help people with utility assistance who need it, to be able to really put a lot of this money on the ground where people need it the most, because we know people are, particularly with the unemployment level where it is, we know people are really in very precarious situations and need a lot of help at this point.
All right, Mayor, our last question comes from Jamie. What are you doing to encourage mask wearing, and why has it not been required yet in the city of St. Louis?
So what are we doing to encourage mask wearing? Well, we're all wearing masks. Since you're all online, go on either Twitter or Facebook today. And our post from this morning was the second little video that we did to show people wearing masks. And you'll see Cedric the Entertainer in there. The last one we had John Goodman in it. This Cedric the Entertainer's in there. Some city employees, other kind of famous people around the city saying, hey, join me, wear a mask. It's really not that much trouble. Now, in terms of requiring mask wearing, we are leaving that up to the individual businesses, because short of putting a police officer or 2 or 3 at every business, the enforcement of that is difficult. But we really are hoping, who asked the question, John?
Jamie,
we're really hoping that you will also help us. I hope you wear masks. when you go out. And I hope that, you know, that example is the best thing that we can do. I mean, I'm never out without a mask. I do this Facebook Live without a mask because, you know, we've got people very far apart from me, but in all the activities that we do here, we all wear masks. I hope you will too.
All right, thank you.
Is that it?
That was the last question, Mayor.
So let me just say thank you, everybody, for the hard work that you've done, and that we have to learn to coexist with COVID so we can have our businesses open, so people can get back to work, but without endangering our health. So that's really what we're working towards here, and staying 6 feet apart, wearing a mask, washing your hands, all of those things are so important to that. We're watching the numbers every day. We talk with you about them 3 times a week. And you can, of course, there's a lot of information online. On the city's website, there's a terrific link to the data on our COVID website. And so take a look at that if you are interested in those numbers. So thank you all for being here today. We'll be back on Friday. It's Wednesday already. We'll be back on Friday. Thank you all.